Nothing in the opening moments tell the player what they are supposed to accomplish. A blank map generates, populated with biomes, and if the player chooses, a handful of creatures. From there, the only structure imposed is whatever the player decides. The game's own pitch describes itself as a petri dish for fantasy civilizations, a space built for creation and destruction in equal measure, with no stated win condition attached to either. One outlet's review of the finished sandbox captured the shape of that absence directly. WorldBox shares a great deal with big strategy games despite offering no ultimate goal, and it tends to end almost inevitably with a boredom-killing nuclear bomb. Another review filed this same year called it a god sim too smart to give you goals, treating the absence of direction as a design choice rather than an oversight. 4 races are capable of building civilizations on their own initiative: humans, elves, dwarves, and orcs. Each begins the same way, with a single wandering unit laying down a campfire that marks the birth of a settlement, then gathering wood and stone to raise houses and a town hall around it. From there, the pattern is consistent across all 4 peoples, even as the aesthetics diverge. A settlement needs a contiguous stretch of buildable land, at least 300 connected tiles excluding mountains, before it can all take root, and once it does, its growth depends entirely on the resources within reach and the traits of whichever units happen to be leading it. Loyalty holds these structures together more than any wall does. A village too far from its capital or governed by a weak king with poor diplomatic standing or led by a lord carrying the ambitious trait can see its loyalty collapse below a critical threshold, at which point rebellion becomes a live possibility. A successful rebellion doesn't just embarrass the parent kingdom, it fractures it, spinning off a new and often hostile state that used to be a loyal province. Watched over enough centuries, a single well-run empire can end up as a dozen squabbling city-states. No invasion required, only the accumulated weight of distance and bad leadership. Time in a WorldBox save is marked out by named eras, called ages, and each one rewrites the rules of survival for however long it lasts. The Age of Hope is the default state. Populations flourish, war becomes less likely, grass biomes grow faster than anything else. Everything past that baseline complicates the picture. The Age of the Sun brings recurring heat waves and global drought that kill off trees at random, favoring desert and savanna growth in their place. The Age of Tears counters that with a global rain, capable of putting out fires across the map, and favors swamp, mushroom, lemon, and jungle biomes. The Age of Moon leans into a subtler kind of change, favoring the crystal biome and unlocking effects tied to specific moon-aligned traits that stay dormant the rest of the year. The Age of Dark drops the world into gloom and lets hostile creatures spawn more freely, favoring the corrupted biome's growth, and the same night-aligned traits the Age of Moon also empowers. The Age of Ice and the Age of Despair both bring the cold, but Despair goes further, seeding ice monsters into the world specifically to hunt down whatever population survived the drop in temperature. And both favor permafrost, with Despair additionally boosting the corrupted biome alongside it. The Age of Chaos doubles the damage dealt in every ongoing war, lets rage clouds provoke otherwise peaceful units into violence, and favors the infernal biome above all others. The Age of Ash inflicts a slow, damage over time effect on the population, and discourages the buildup of standing armies, an entire era built around exhaustion rather than any single catastrophe. The Age of Wonders closes out the cycle, favoring the enchanted and candy biomes and seeding magic rain clouds capable of randomly buffing whatever units pass beneath them. 10 ages in total, each one visibly reshaping the map around whatever season the simulation has currently entered. Left running long enough, a civilization can develop a religion of its own, a structure the game treats as a distinct object from the kingdom that spawned it, complete with its own name, banner, and evolving set of traits. A newly formed religion is handed a small, randomized set of traits on creation, and its practitioners can go on to unlock more by advancing the faith over time. These traits aren't cosmetic. Most of them grant a civilization access to specific magical rites, cast through the world map as deliberate acts rather than passive bonuses, and they see the heaviest use during wartime, when a kingdom's faith becomes as much a weapon as its army. Editing a religion's traits by hand marks it with the divine insight trait, a small acknowledgement from the simulation that something outside the natural order has touched it. Every individual creature in a WorldBox world, not just its kings, carries its own set of behavioral traits, and those traits accumulate through experience in ways that turn generic villagers into named figures worth tracking. A unit that survives 11 or more fights against the same category of creature earns the veteran trait. Once that specifically defeats a spell-casting enemy earns Mage Slayer. Killing a dragon earns Dragon Slayer. Killing the king of a rival kingdom, an act that typically requires isolating both the target and the intended killer with the game's magnet tool. Before engineering the encounter, earns King Slayer. None of these traits are handed out by the player directly. They are consequences the simulation assigns after the fact, turning a unit's combat history into a permanent part of its identity. Among the game's playable disaster tools sits Crabzilla, a creature large enough that the other 4 races treat it as a god in its own right the moment it's summoned, since summoning it is itself an act only the player, standing in for a god, can perform. Once active, Crabzilla can be steered directly, its claws firing lasers capable of setting fire to anything they touch, including tornadoes already in progress, and tearing up the ground beneath it as it moves, killing vegetation and knocking back anything caught underneath. Crabzilla carries more health than any other single unit in the game, somewhere north of 15,000 points. And when it finally dies, whether from accumulated damage or from the player simply exiting its control, it detonates in an explosion roughly the size of the game's own nuclear weapon, large enough to spawn a handful of smaller, evil-tempered crabs out of the wreckage before the crater settles. Among the disease options available to the player, mushroom spores are, according to the game's own community documentation, the most dangerous, despite looking the least threatening on paper. Where other plagues damage infected units directly, spores do nothing to the living creature carrying them. Only on death does the infection matter, transforming the corpse into a mushroom man that then spreads more spores into whatever population is nearby. Because it deals no visible harm while it's spreading, an infected settlement can look entirely healthy, right up until its death rate begins climbing. At which point, the outbreak is already self-sustaining, propagating through every unit it manages to kill, rather than every unit it manages to merely infect. In WorldBox, humans start weak and traitless, with no special biological edge over the other 3 civilized races, and their identity is built around flexibility instead. They can settle almost anywhere, and their growth depends less on any inherent advantage than on patience and whatever resources happen to be within their reach. Their architecture, drifting from scattered wood and stone, houses toward the kind of sprawling, room-by-room additions that mark a kingdom too established to plan its own layout anymore. Elves, by contrast, hold an inherited preference for trees. Over the orcs, they're framed as opposing, and most of the game's non-civilized wildlife treats them and several other unaligned creatures as non-threatening by default, letting a young elven settlement dodge the early predation that can wipe out a fledgling human or dwarf village before it gets off the ground. Critical response to WorldBox settled fairly quickly around the same observation the game makes about itself. It isn't going anywhere, and that's the appeal. One review described spending its 4 hours with the game and feeling entirely satisfied to stop there, calling it a happy 4 hours, without qualification. Another framed the entire experience as scientific observation gone wrong, watching fantastical nations collapse under conditions the players set in motion and then mostly stepped back from. Steam's own review aggregate, sitting in the high positive 90s percentile across tens of thousands of ratings, reflects a user base that has largely made peace with what the game does and doesn't offer. No story, no ending, and, as one reviewer put it without much complaint, an experience that tends to end in a nuclear bomb, regardless of how it started. If this one resonated, subscribe. New essays drop weekly, and you never know what's coming next. Share it with someone who'd get it, and leave a comment. I want to know which door this opened for you. Mystery Compendium. The archive is always open.